right, so moving along to this afternoon's portion of the agenda, we've got a panel focused on insights from aviation psychology. First up we have Captain Owen Sims. Captain Owen Sims is a type rating instructor at UK-based regional airline Flybe. I first met Captain Sims at Watts this year, where he gave a presentation very similar to the one that you're about to see. An engaging and dynamic speaker, Captain Sims brings a unique perspective on human behavior and how it relates to pilot performance on the job and in training. His insights struck me as especially applicable to ab initio students and their instructors. Owen speaks from experience. Having suffered an episode of depression some years ago, he recently developed an interest in psychology and psychotherapy, and in particular how these impacted on his role as an instructor. At Flybe, he's an instructor and examiner, as well as a CRM trainer and an active line pilot. He speaks around the world about how the principles of cognitive behavioral therapy can be applied to flight training, the application of mindfulness, and last year on person-centered psychotherapy. He has a bachelor's degree in philosophy and is working towards another in psychology, and was recently elected a fellow of the Royal Aeronautical Society. All the way from the United Kingdom, please welcome Captain Owen Sims.
Thanks very much, Darren. Where's my clicker? Oh, there it is. And remove that, because one version of my face is quite enough for everyone to look at. Thank you. Right, good afternoon. So, the modern airline pilot, the modern air transport pilot. The analogy I like to draw is with a surgeon. We talked a lot this morning all about competency-based training. Why is a pilot like a surgeon? Because a surgeon needs technical skill, right? Needs to be good with a blade. But we're not going to let just anyone who's good with a blade do surgery. The difference, we used to, of course. I mean, back in the 17th century, the barber surgeon was a job. This was someone who could cut hair and shave beards and could therefore be called upon to amputate limbs or bloodlet. But these days we regard barbers and surgeons as very different professions, requiring quite different skills and different competencies. And a similar thing is happening to the profession of airline pilot. The airline pilot needs the technical skill of being able to fly a plane. Of course, no one's denying that. Just as a surgeon needs the technical skill of being able to use a scalpel. But what marks out the airline pilot as different is the particular knowledge that he or she needs to possess and that peculiar set of non-technical competencies. These are workload management, decision-making, leadership, teamwork, communication, and so on. We face a challenge, therefore, in the world of flight training, which is how to train the non-technical competencies. That's not quite right. We face a bigger challenge than that. Can I break you the bad news? Human beings can't actually fly. We're not supposed to. It's not something we're naturally equipped for. I mean, we do, but only thanks to this extraordinary device, the brain. Or one key area of it, this section here, the neocortex, if you like, but I like to refer to it as the human brain. It's peculiar to the human race. We have, as far as we can tell, a unique capacity in the animal kingdom for imagination. We can imagine things that don't physically exist in the world. And when we do, it gives us this enormous evolutionary advantage, because when we're faced with a problem, like we can't fly, we can imagine what the solution to that problem would look like, and then we use our unrivaled capability for logic and calculation and reasoning based on facts and reality to realise the solution to that problem. But it's only thanks to the operation of this bit of the brain, the human brain. Some call it the system 2 brain. It's the bit of the brain you use for conscious thinking that we're able to do things like fly. Now then, you may not be aware, but whilst you're sat there apparently not doing very much, actually your body is performing in excess of 1 quadrillion functions every single second. Stands to reason that most of that is taken care of automatically, and that is where the chimp brain comes in. The animal brain, the mammal brain, system 1. It's the sum total of all the automatic brain activity that is needed to keep us alive. I wouldn't survive if I had to think about how to breathe, or how to digest my food, or how to stand upright. It's all taken care of automatically by the chimp brain. Similarly, I would not survive if, when I was placed under threat to my survival, I had to sit and think about the solution to the problem. If there's a threat to my survival, it's the chimp brain that responds. Immediately, automatically, and that's what stress is. Adrenaline and cortisol fire into the bloodstream, preparing the body to deal with the threat. We call it the fight or flight response, as I'm sure you're aware. But is it fight or is it flight? What do we actually do? It depends. And it depends on the particular emotional response that is generated at the same time by the chimp brain. Typically, it will be anxiety or fear. This compels my prepared body to run away from the threat and thus survive. It might not be anxiety or fear. It might be that I'm to attack the threat, in which case the automatic emotional response is one of anger. Or it might be that I'm to withdraw from the situation entirely and wait for it to change, and that's depression. Anger, fear and depression are the stock in trade of the chimp brain. They are powerful emotional reactions compelling us into behaviour that will ensure our survival. That's the duality at the heart of the human condition. Emotions compelling us to survive, that's the chimp brain, and at the same time the human brain, which we use for complex and conscious, calculated thought. Which works brilliantly as long as we restrict ourselves to living in caves and hunting and gathering our food. It's when we try and do silly things like fly, or other unnatural activities, that the behaviour inspired by the chimp brain can be best described as unhelpful. Unhelpful behaviour is that behaviour where I say to myself, I don't know why I'm doing that. I know what I want to be doing, but for some reason I find myself doing the opposite. What am I thinking? Answer is I'm probably not thinking. Not in the sense of engaging the human brain. And particularly in flying, the more unnatural the environment that we're in, the more unhelpful the behaviour is likely to be. In fact, whenever you see that sort of behaviour, what on earth were they thinking? What was I thinking? Whenever you see that, it is very likely to be acting in response to the dictates of the chimp brain, that natural brain, in an unnatural environment. I'll give you an example of unnatural environment, flying environment, with unhelpful behaviour writ large. Going back to Mangalore, just outside Mumbai, 2010. It's Air India Express flight 312, I think. Doesn't matter. An aircraft is commencing a procedural approach. And the first officer is flying, and the aircraft gets high on the profile. Way too high, in fact. Now, the captain, for at least some time before this, has been asleep. So his human brain, as it were, is switched off. Discovering, suddenly, the aircraft to be miles too high on the profile clearly comes as a bit of a shock. And the chimp brain responds the way that billions of years worth of evolution have compelled it to respond, in the form of stress. Hard on the heels of the stress response comes the automatic emotional response of anxiety. Now, here is where we hit our problem. When I'm anxious, I perceive things as worse than they actually are. Again, it's for safety and survival reasons. Is that a snake or a stick? Assume snake and act accordingly, because I'm guaranteed survival that way. In other words, my heightened emotional state colours my perception of reality. This, I suspect, is what happened to the captain in this case. Rather than perceiving the reality of the situation in terms of altitude, vertical speed and position, he perceives something like, my goodness, this is all going horribly wrong. And the problem with that perception is that that perception is in and of itself stressful, thus heightening the activity of the chimp brain. Now he's got options at this point, but he needs his human brain to be active to deploy those options. The chimp brain doesn't do facts or reality or knowledge or understanding. Of course, the next best thing to do is nothing, right? Sit on your hands. Don't do anything. Give yourself a moment. But the chimp brain doesn't do waiting either. The chimp brain commands an immediate, active response. Do something now. And so what does he do? Chops the power, throws out the flaps and the gear, and commands the autopilot into a steep descent. 5 miles out, we should be at about 1,500 feet, coming down at about 600 or 700 feet per minute. We're actually at 3,500 feet and coming down at a little more than 2,000 feet per minute. Now, all of the pilots in the room are there going, no, that's no, break that off, go around, missed approach, give yourself another chance, that's not working. But that's an intellectual human brain thought you've got to have in the cold light of day. With the extra activity in the chimp brain, all we've got there is an increase in the emotional side that's going on. Perhaps he experiences an increasing anxiety. Maybe he starts to get angry at the first officer for having dumped him in that situation. Maybe he starts to doubt his own abilities as a pilot. Who knows? The actual specifics don't matter, but all of that heightened emotion is doing is increasing the amount of stress and the activity levels in the chimp brain. Thus, he does not execute a missed approach, but rather he disconnects the autopilot and drives the nose of the aircraft down towards the ground. Now we're coming down at a little over 4,000 feet per minute. And yet, still, the extra stress in the chimp brain, more emotion, more stress, like a battery in thermal runaway. We're in this positive feedback situation. His chimp brain is the only active part of his brain. The way I know that is that the aircraft was shouting at him. Pull up, pull up. The first officer was shouting at him. Captain, pull up, we're too high. There's not enough runway left. Pull up. But those messages have to go into the human brain, they have to be cross-checked against memory, the correct procedure recalled, that procedure sent to the motor functions of the brain and the action taken. And that ain't happening because his human brain is nowhere. So what's the result? If we imagine this stage is the runway, right? We're supposed to cross the threshold at about 50 feet at about 140 knots. He instead was doing 160 knots and at about 200 feet. The runway is 8,000 feet long. By the time it first touched down, there's barely 3,000 feet of runway left. It is possible that had he applied full brakes and maximum reverse at that moment, it might have been okay, but in his chimp brain addled state, we've got almost no hope of seeing the desired behaviour at this point, and instead what he does is he tries somewhat belatedly to initiate a go-around and applies full power. All that does is extends the landing roll beyond the end of the runway. Which might have been alright, had it not been for the fact that off the end of this particular runway is a 200-foot drop to a valley floor below. And that was the result. 166 souls on board, there were 8 survivors. It's not the only time it's happened. Tenerife, 1977, a 747 captain so frustrated and, if you will, angry at the situation he was in. Ultimately, that led to taking off on a foggy runway and hitting another 747. Mid-Atlantic, 2009. 2 pilots, both so incapacitated by fear and anxiety, they held an aircraft in a stall whilst it fell 32,000 feet out of the sky. Resolute Bay, 2012. First officer, whose level of belief in himself and his own abilities was so slight that he kept quiet, or at least didn't speak up enough, while the captain was merrily flying them into the side of a mountain. Human emotions are like thunderstorms. They are naturally occurring phenomena. They are not inherently bad things, they serve a purpose, but they need to be understood and they need to be managed appropriately, because like with thunderstorms, human emotions have the power to bring down aircraft. So, we need a management strategy. We want to manage these emotional reactions and produce more helpful behaviour in the pilot. And this is where the psychotherapy angle comes in. Because that's what psychotherapists do with their clients who are suffering from, say, generalised anxiety disorder or clinical depression. Manage the emotional reaction, produce a more helpful reaction. So what does a psychotherapist do with his or her client that an instructor might do with a trainee? Well, let's start with this. The therapist with their client will practice CPR. It's not what you think. Cardiopulmonary resuscitation is very rarely necessary in psychotherapy scenarios. Well, maybe if they get really intense, but this is the constant positive regard. The what now? Yeah. That's where I take the person and I separate the person from their behaviour. And I hold the person in a constant positive regard. The person is a good person, irrespective of how they have behaved. Now, that can be a bit of a challenge for a therapist, because some people do some pretty nasty things. And it can be a challenge for an instructor as well. If you've got a struggling trainee, someone who can't seem to produce the behaviour you want them to produce, it's very tempting to start to label the trainee as lazy or stupid or doing it on purpose for some reason. So as an instructor, I'm going to keep applying the constant positive regard. This trainee is a good person. It's their behaviour that's the problem, but they, I'm sure, are trying their best. And they want to learn. So what is it? What is it that's stopping them producing the behaviour that presumably the trainee themselves want to produce? It's some sort of unhelpful, mismanaged emotional reaction. And that is a technique from person-centered psychotherapy, the constant positive regard. Now, to fix and uncover this unhelpful emotional reaction, we can deploy a little bit of cognitive behavioural therapy, the other CBT. Which confuses the heck out of some people, I have to say. And that relies for its effectiveness on this. When we're talking about emotional reactions, there's no such thing as an overreaction. Let me try that one again. Emotionally speaking, there is no such thing as an overreaction. Because we don't react emotionally to things. We react to how we think about the things. This is a thing that happens, an activating event. Doesn't matter what it is. Spilled milk, tax demand, getting too high on an approach. It doesn't directly trigger the emotional response. Rather, it triggers some internal thought process or belief. But it's not a human brain belief that I've chosen to have. It's an automatic chimp brain type thought that has been thrown up in the light of this activating event. The pilot in the Mangalore case, the Mumbai case, didn't get scared because the aircraft was too high on the approach. He got scared because of the thought, which was probably something like, my goodness, this is all going wrong. It's a disaster. And it's that thought that leads to the emotional consequence. So that's my job now. Now that I've figured out that this trainee, be it ab initio or recurrent, is not producing the right behaviour, it's probably an adverse emotional reaction, I can kind of reverse engineer the process and try and uncover what that thought is. That thought will make proportional sense alongside that emotional reaction. You know, crying over spilled milk is of course silly, but crying because your sense of failure has been enacted by the spilled milk, that makes a great deal of sense. And that will be the thought. Something like, I'm a failure, it's all going wrong, how could I be so stupid? Moreover, there will be evidence for that belief. There'll be a good reason, which if we keep the positive regard going, we can help to understand. There'll be a good reason why the person thinks the way they do. There'll be evidence for it, and we can challenge that evidence. Does that evidence support that belief? Might it support a different belief? Might it not actually be true? And if we make that go away, then the emotional consequence doesn't necessarily start, and then placed in that exact same activating event situation, the trainee in question hopefully can more accurately manage their emotional reactions. So those are instructional techniques. But we can also give the pilots themselves a technique for self-management of emotional reactions. I want to introduce just one. It's used by therapists in the treatment of, amongst other things, anxiety, and it's based on mindfulness. Now, some of you might have heard of it and are instantly getting uncomfortable. And then I say, well, it's actually based largely on Buddhist meditation and Buddhist practices and Eastern philosophy. And people really start to lose interest because you think I'm about to get out the bongos and the incense and talk to you about your spirituality, becoming one with your innermost child. No, I'm not. There's hard scientific research out there. It's a growing field. Check out the work of Carl Eisen. He's from Florida. And he's got a website called mindfulaviator.org. The work of Dr. Anne-Marie Landerman at the Delft Institute of Technology in the Netherlands. Or also from the Netherlands, from the Dutch NASA, the NLR, Edzard Boland. There's a team of scientists, mostly from Norway, who have also looked at how mindfulness training can, and I quote, alleviate some of the physiological stress response associated with an increase in cognitive workload. In other words, when you're surprised or when you're startled. I won't go into massive details about what it is for the uninitiated because I don't have time. I encourage you to do your own research, but put simply, it's a series of both informal and formal practices wherein we can train ourselves to pay attention on purpose to things as they really are in the here and now, in this present moment, and reserve judgment. Not label as bad things, or indeed as good things, just things as they are. Now, what if that pilot had had that ability to say, not it's all going wrong, but merely to be able to say, well, hang on, what is going on in terms of airspeed, altitude, vertical speed, aircraft position, and all of that? What's really happening? And equally, notice what's going on in our own minds, our own emotional state. What if that pilot had the ability to go, I recognise I've experienced a strong emotional reaction. Or even, I've experienced a strong emotional reaction and done something that I now regret. That's all okay. It's all acceptable. It's not bad. It's just as it is that I'm going to choose to move my attention on purpose to where I want it to be. And that way we manage, the pilot can manage his or her emotional reactions to produce more desirable behaviour. And when we see that behaviour, the behaviour we want, we're going to positively reinforce it. Now, some of my grumpier colleagues start to switch off. If they didn't switch off at the mindfulness bit, they definitely switch off when I talk about positive reinforcement. Because they think that that's all about, hey, just looking on the bright side and ignoring reality. Yeah, you crashed, but you brought a pen for your debrief, so well done. It's not that. It's a form of behavioural conditioning that B.F. Skinner, psychologist back in the 50s, thank you, he did it on rats. He took a rat and he put this rat in a box. I am simplifying the details, but basically in this box was a red button and a green button. And when the rat chanced to press the red button, the poor unfortunate creature got a nasty electric shock. On the other hand, when it pressed the green button, nothing happened. This we call punishment. We ignore, effectively, the behaviour we want, but when we see the behaviour we don't want, we make things unpleasant. This is an instructional technique still deployed by some today. In another, looking at no one, in another box was another rat, and this rat was being subjected to a loud and unpleasant ongoing noise. Now, when it pressed the red button, the noise just kept going. Nothing happened in effect. But when it pressed the green button, that noise would temporarily stop. And the rat got a little bit of a sense of relief. This is negative reinforcement. We reinforce the behaviour we want to see by taking away some ongoing unpleasantness and providing just a momentary sense of relief. It's like when you file a tax return. You know, you don't feel, woo, I've achieved that, but at least you feel a sense of relief because that's gone away for another year. paging the CRA. I'm so glad you brought up tax stuff earlier. It really neatly illustrates my point. Now, a third rat in the third box. Now, this rat pressed the red button, nothing really happens. But when it pressed the green button, it was rewarded with a little treat. Now, it's probably worth pointing out that all three rats learned don't press the red button, do press the green button. But the one that learned the quickest was the third rat. If you wish to change effectively and long-term the behaviour of any mammal, and that includes the airline pilot, it is far more effective to positively reinforce the desired behaviour when we see it through reward than it is to punish the undesirable behaviour. And that, I guess, is my point, ladies and gents. The psychotherapist and the instructor are in the same business, trying to modify the behaviour of our fellow human beings. We used to concentrate on modifying the technical skill by modifying the technical behaviour of the hands and feet. The techniques gleaned from psychotherapy can help us modify the behaviour in respect of what we do with our brains, and that enhances the non-technical skill set. Lest we forget, yes, the modern airliner is of course a technical marvel, must be flown by highly trained, skilled pilots, but fundamentally it's flesh and blood emotional animals that we place at the controls. Thank you.